Good morning, everyone. I'm nice and loud today. How you doing? If you're good, say I'm good. Raise your hand if you normally attend the first service. Raise it up real high. Most of the time, raise your hand if you normally attend the second service. A couple of you came to the first one to try to beat the snow, and you failed because it's already coming down. So we're going to pray for safe travels on the way home. We're all going to be okay. Then I am fully prepared to preach to an empty room. Second service, that'll be okay. One more quick announcement before we jump into the message. On your seat is a little card that says the fastest way to change your life. That is the name of our sermon series that starts a week from today. I'm also praising God we didn't start it today. It starts next week after the snowstorm. This is a series going through the book of Acts and talking about how God changes our lives. And it is also the title of my very first book. I wrote a book. How cool is that? Give it up for me. Wow, amazing, amazing. Wow, thank you for that totally spontaneous applause. Really appreciate that. This is a book from my heart to yours, and it is for that person who feels like, man, I'm stuck, I'm struggling, I'm ready to change, but I'm just not sure how. It's for the person wrestling with that addiction or that mental health issue or the marriage crisis or whatever it is. This book is for you. So come on out next week and take that card with you. Bring somebody with you next week. We believe God is going to do big things through this series. Amen? All right, we're going to jump into a message. This is just a sort of one-off message in between the Christmas series and before we start our next series. The message today is for the person who would say, this year, we need God to work in our family. I've been the pastor of the Bridge now for 4 years, and if there is one single thing I hear more than anything else, being the pastor of this church, it is so many of you who feel the weight of family members who are struggling, children who are struggling, spouses who are struggling, husbands, wives, parents who are struggling, and so many people come into this room every week saying, I need God to work not in my life, although we all need God to work in our lives as well, but to work in the life of somebody I love. Let me ask you, who is that person you're worried about? Maybe it's a child who you're concerned is going down the wrong path, into that addiction or away from God or into a relationship that you know is not going to end well for them. And you're saying, I need God to show up in the life of my child. Maybe that's a high school age child, maybe it's an adult child, who knows, but you're saying, I need God to show up. For a lot of you, it is the spouse sitting next to you. A lot of spouses I know, you get dragged here by your wife or you get dragged here by your husband, and the person sitting next to you who dragged you here is praying for you and praying that God shows up in your life. I know that's true for many of you here today. For some of you, it's your parents. I know a lot of us, we've seen our parents walk away from church or walk away from faith or walk away from God or walk into some bad decisions. You know, it is never too late for Satan to come after somebody, and some people walk away or get into some bad stuff even in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and on. Who is that person you're praying for? Who is that person that you're asking God to show up for in your family? If that's you, this sermon is for you. If your whole family's doing amazing, count yourself blessed because you are in the minority and you can file this sermon away for a later date. Now, let me say before we jump into the actual passage and passages that we're going to look at today, at the end of the day, we can't control anybody. Can I get an amen? We can't control that husband, that wife, that child, that parent. We also can't control God. God is going to do what he's going to do, when he's going to do it. We cannot twist his arm into doing anything that he doesn't want to do at the given moment. However, God often moves in similar ways in families. And I want to challenge you that some of you can set yourself up to partner with God for his work in your family. There are some things you can do to say, hey, God, I'm doing what I can. Not that I can control that person, not that I can control you, but I'm doing what I can to set our family off for you to show up in my family. So that's what we're going to do today. I want to show you how God works in families and then give you some action steps you can take to set yourself up for God to show up in your family. Now I'm going to preach this to you from how God worked in one family, and a lot of you have probably never thought about this family before or thought about this story before, because this is one of those stories that is actually not all in one place in the Bible. There are a lot of stories in the Bible, and even stories of families in the Bible, where it's like you start reading and you hear the story and then you're done. This one is more, you got to look at it. It pops up in all different places in the New Testament, and you got to put all these different pieces together. But God has really given us a beautiful story of a family who was in some ways at risk, but God showed up in a big way. If you're ready to see, say, I'm ready. All right, so this is the story. It starts with a woman named Lois. Lois was likely similar in age to Jesus and lived right around the same time. She didn't know him growing up, but they just happened to live right around the same time. Jesus grows up, she grows up, Jesus dies on the cross, rises again. Everyone starts to spread the message of Jesus, and Lois hears about it and gives her life to Jesus. Now, Lois has a daughter named Eunice who is married to an unnamed husband. We do not know the husband's name, but at some point, Lois starts to talk to her daughter Eunice about Jesus, and Eunice also says yes to a relationship with Jesus. In the early days of the church, the Christians were very militant about not marrying somebody who wasn't a Christian if they were a Christian. So it's very likely that Eunice and the husband are already married before Eunice says yes to Jesus. And Eunice and the husband have a son named, do any of you know? Oh, we got some Bible scholars in the room. Eunice and the husband have a son named Timothy. And Lois and Eunice pass on the faith about Jesus to Timothy, and Timothy gives his life to Jesus. Now, I wish we could share in this story of this little family what happens to the husband. However, we do not know. The Bible does not record that part of the story, so we can't go into that. However, and some of you already know, we do know what happens to Timothy. Spoiler alert, Timothy becomes one of the greatest leaders in the early church. And we are so used to hearing his story, we lose track of the emotional journey that Lois and Eunice must have been on when it comes to this family unit. If you've ever been in this situation, or you've had friends in this situation where mom's a Christian and dad's not, everyone's praying for dad, but also everybody's praying for the children. Everybody's praying for the child. Everybody in this situation is feeling the weight of Timothy. Why? Because he has no spiritual father figure to look up to. There is no one guiding his path. There's no one to say, son, as a dad, this is what it looks like to follow Jesus. This is what it looks like to follow Jesus when it comes to your finances, when it comes to your behavior, when it comes to your words, when it comes to your career, when it comes to your sexuality. There is no dad in the picture. And in fact, if Timothy is looking to his father at all for leadership or direction, his father is pulling him in the wrong direction. We don't know, obviously, the details, but I am very confident that Lois and Eunice were praying for Timothy all during his childhood. We're praying for him as he grows up. We're praying for him as he enters into his teenage years, saying, God, please keep Timothy on the path. Timothy would have certainly been the person in this family unit, obviously besides the husband, but the person in this family unit that Lois and Eunice are praying for. God, would you show up in Timothy's life? In some ways against the odds, would you make sure Timothy walks the path with Jesus? And their prayers were answered, as we all know. God shows up in a massive way in Timothy's life. What I want to remind you, or for some of you see for the first time, is that God didn't show up in Timothy's life just through the influence of Lois and Eunice. It was not just grandma and mom that were used by God to affect Timothy's path. This family unit did not live in spiritual isolation. They lived in a broader community. They were surrounded by all sorts of people that God used to keep Timothy moving in the right direction. The first group of people is just the general group of believers who lived in this area. We see this in Acts 16:1. Paul came to Derbe and then to Lystra, where a disciple named Timothy lived, whose mother was Jewish and a believer, but whose father was a Greek. This is the basic setup we just saw. Everybody except Lois is mentioned here. Lois is mentioned in another place. Paul shows up in Lystra. Timothy is there. How did Paul meet Timothy? He shows up, and it's not just random. The believers at Lystra and Iconium spoke well of him. Don't miss this. All the believers around Timothy say, hey, Paul, you got to meet this guy, Timothy. And Paul wanted to take him along on the journey. Why? Was it just God spoke to Paul and said, take this guy? No, it was because Timothy was embedded in a broader community, a group of believers who recommended that Paul meet Timothy. What does this mean? Do not forget, even day one in the church, there were commandments to not quit meeting together as some are in the habit of doing. We see that in Hebrews. Even in the early church, there were family units like this who disappeared, who drifted away, who moved away from the broader community. They still believed in Jesus, but they just stuck to themselves as a family. That was not the case for Lois and Eunice and Timothy. Eunice sent Timothy to church. Eunice sent Timothy to youth group. I don't know if it was really a youth group, right? It probably wasn't youth groups at the time like that. But this family was not isolated. They stayed connected. Timothy was connected to this broader group of believers, and it was through that group of believers that Timothy met Paul. You all see where I'm going with this? It wasn't a family in isolation. It was a family in community. It wasn't just this group of believers, though. It was also a spiritual brother named Silas. We're going to talk about Paul in a minute and Paul's influence on Timothy's life, but don't forget that Timothy also had his own spiritual brothers. One of them was Silas. Silas and Timothy went on their own missionary journeys together. It wasn't just always Silas, Timothy, and Paul. Sometimes it was just Silas and Timothy out there in the trenches, doing life together, doing ministry together, staying connected as brothers in Christ. We know that happened at least one time because in Acts 18:5, it says, when Silas and Timothy came from Macedonia, Paul devoted himself exclusively to preaching. So Paul was in one place having to make tents to pay the bills. When Silas and Timothy show up, they're able to take care of Paul's needs so that Paul can exclusively focus on preaching. But that means that Silas and Timothy, as we see here, they came from Macedonia where they were doing ministry together. It was not just Lois, Eunice, and Timothy trying to keep this family moving towards Jesus as best they could. It was a group of believers. It was the spiritual brother in Silas. And it was a spiritual father in Paul. God brought a divine replacement to this husband, to this father who was not able to be there on a spiritual level for Timothy. And Paul took Timothy with him, took him under his wing, and encouraged him, and loved on him, and challenged him. And again, this is recorded in Scripture. In 2 Timothy, which is a letter from Paul to Timothy, it says this, I remind you, think about hearing this from the Apostle Paul, who's your mentor. I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid. Timothy, don't be timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. In 1 Timothy, a different letter, Paul literally says to him, to Timothy, my true, what's that word? Feel the weight of that word in the context of this family. We're all used to hearing about Paul being this mentor, this spiritual father to Timothy. We often forget that Timothy did not have a dad at home who was modeling what it looked like to follow Jesus. And Paul shows up and says, hey, to Timothy, my true son in the faith, and writes this entire letter to him. This was not a family in isolation. Lois and Eunice made a decision to keep their family connected to the broader spiritual community. And it was through the group of believers, the spiritual brother in Silas and the spiritual father in Paul. It was through these believers that Timothy's life was transformed. Y'all see what I'm saying? Here's the point of what I'm trying to say. If you've been praying for your family, if you've been praying for somebody in your family, let me remind you of how God works in families. God uses his family to work in your family. The thing that God actually uses to transform individuals' lives, to transform marriages, to transform relationships, to overcome addictions, to help people walk in purity and sobriety and health and wholeness, God uses his broader family to work in your individual family. Or to put it another way, your family needs a family. Your family needs a family. We're like, we've got each other. But each other is not God's plan. It's not God's complete plan. God has intended that families, individual, biological, earthly families, are surrounded by broader spiritual families who show up to support and encourage and care for that biological family. Does your family look like this? And by the way, If you are coming to church on Sunday mornings, but that is the complete picture of what your plan for spiritual growth looks like, this is still what your family looks like. Guess what? No one is going to walk up to you while you're getting a donut and say, hey, can I pray for your marriage? Because they're not going to know you're struggling in your marriage. If you come here every week, but this is all your church involvement is coming on a Sunday morning or watching online. If that's your plan for spiritual growth, you are an isolated family. You do not actually have a spiritual family around you in a church this size. If we were 50 people, maybe it would happen organically. People would just stroll up to you when you walked in and get to know you, and friendships would form organically. But guess what? In a church where hundreds of people show up for every service, that will never happen by accident. It will never happen by just coming here and sitting in service week after week after week. If you are coming to church and that's it, your family is still isolated. It does not have the people around you that God wants around you. You need the same things. You need a family of believers. You need spiritual siblings. You need spiritual parents. You know what I want for every dad in every household? A spiritual dad. No matter how old you are, you give me your 30s, 40s, 50s, there is still somebody 10, 20, 30 years ahead of you who can spiritually mentor you. You can have Pauls alongside you on that journey. You know what else I want for dads and families? Spiritual brothers. A lot of you, your biological brothers are not running full speed toward Jesus. And you might have a great relationship with your biological family. I'm talking about adults now, right? You've got brothers that you keep in touch with who live in the area or don't live in the area, and it feels like you've got good people around you. But are those people around you running full speed towards Jesus? Because if not, you need some spiritual siblings as well. You need a Silas in your life, someone who's in the trenches of following Jesus alongside you. You need that broader group of people to know you. Every family needs a spiritual family. Does your family have a family? Let me ask you that. Does your family have a family? The thing that bugs me so much, and I hear this all the time, is our family is too busy for church. Our family is too busy for church, especially when it comes to joining a small group or something like that. We've got too much going on and we just can't fit that in. That breaks my heart every time. Not because we just want more people to be in small groups, but because when you say we're too busy for church or we're too busy for a small group or we're too busy to build those relationships, you're robbing yourself of the very thing that God wants to use to make an impact in your family. You're pulling yourself out of the very medicine that God has prescribed for families to be transformed and for individuals and families to be transformed. You can pray that God would just do it in your biological family. Eunice and Lois could have prayed for that as well, but that wasn't God's plan. And not only was that not God's plan for that little family, that he was just going to work in Timothy's life in their familial isolation, but I never see it nowadays either. I've never seen a family transformed in spiritual isolation. The medicine that God has prescribed is other relationships with other people. When I get sick, I turn into the biggest baby, okay? I can have the smallest cold, like the smallest little sniffle, and Joe will be like, hey, can you stop by Target, to pick something up or whatever? And I'm like, not in my weakened state, right? I'm like, I cannot do it. I'm in pain. I like going to the Old West or something. I'm like, I just can't get it. It's the influenza. It's it's whatever. The plague has got me. And as a result, a lot of times I don't go to the doctor because I'm too sick. I'm too sick to go to the doctor, right? For years, this hasn't happened in a long time as much, but for years I got this horrible sinus infection every year sometime in the winter. God had delivered me from it, but it used to happen like clockwork every year, and like clockwork every year, I would not go to the doctor until it was like severely hurting me, right? Until I was in a bad place, fever and all sinuses and all that sort of thing. And then I would finally go to the doctor, and I'd go to the doctor and I'd walk in and they'd, look at me and say, yep, you've got this, lung infection or whatever it is. And then they would tell me, here's the prescription, go to Walgreens and pick it up. And in that moment, there was this part of me that always was like, wanted to say, I can't in my weakened state, right? I can't get over to Walgreens. Can't you see I'm sick? But if I were to say that, it would be the silliest thing ever. because the actual prescription waiting for me at Walgreens, though it is hard to get over there, though I'm way sicker than normally would be my excuse to not go to Walgreens or go to Target, I have to do it because that is where the prescription is. And if I said to that doctor, can't you just like pull out from behind one of those cabinet doors the exact medicine I need? The doctor would say, that is not a service we provide. We don't just have all the medicine here. We prescribe it to you and then you go get it. What I'm trying to say to you is if you are saying, God, do something big in my family, but just pull it out from behind some cabinet door and just hand it to me and make it all work out perfectly and I don't have to do anything, you are asking God for a service he does not provide. You are asking him to give you a medicine in a way he said, I don't do it that way. And I know a lot of times when you say we're too busy, what's actually happening is you're really just too drained. You're too emotionally drained, you're too depleted, you're too low, you're struggling too much as a family. You are like me saying, in my weakened state, I could never get us involved in a group because I can barely hold it together myself. But the reality is that situation is exactly when you most need the people. It's exactly when you most need to be surrounded, is in your weakened state. That is when you have to get the broader family around your family. So let me ask you, does your family have a family? Or some of you are thinking, for you, you're like, I can barely get my husband or my wife or my child to come to church. I can't actually get them connected to this broader community. I can't actually get them to join a small group or join a team or do anything like that. Or maybe that person that you're praying for in your family doesn't actually live in your home. Maybe they live in another state and you're like, well, what am I to do? I can't actually get that person involved in that broader family. Here's what I would ask you. Are you modeling it for them? If you're like, my son, he so badly needs some good Christian friends around him. Do you have good Christian friends around you? Are you modeling that for him? One of the things that breaks my heart is when parents are like, I want my children to be in church and in youth group, but you are not in church and you're not in small group. You're saying you want this thing for them, but they're not going to make decisions based on your words. They're going to make decisions based on your actions. I want our daughter to grow up watching me and Joe lean on other people. Why? Well, one, because we do need it, but also because I want our daughter to see that we are doing the things that we hope that she does. We want her in church, so we're going to be in church. We want her to be in Christian relationships with Christian friends, so we're going to be in Christian relationships with Christian friends. Does your family have a family? Are you modeling it for them? Even if they live in another state, even if they're an adult, are you modeling the kind of faith that you want that person to have? And by the way, you need it too. You also do. So does your family have a family, and are you modeling it for people? That is why we constantly talk about small groups. That is why we keep preaching it. Some of you, you've been coming to the bridge since the day I got here, and you're like, when will Vince stop talking about small groups? Never. It's never going to happen. I'll stop talking about it when every single person at the bridge is in a small group. And like we've talked about over and over again, hundreds and hundreds of people have joined small groups at the bridge. We currently have hundreds and hundreds of people in small groups right now at the bridge, in life groups, and in the last round of Connect groups again. Hundreds of people, but it is still the minority. It's still the minority of people who call this place their home are in a small group. Most people still aren't in it. By the way, that's also what I keep talking about. A lot of times I'll preach one of these sermons and people will go, isn't everyone in one already? No, it is still a minority. And by the way, that's not completely a bad thing. Because if a day ever comes where 80% of our people are in small groups, you know what that means? We stop reaching new people. There's always supposed to be tons of people in this room who aren't saved, because that means we're reaching people who are far from God. There's always supposed to be tons of people in this room who aren't in a small group, because that means we're actually providing a place for people to get connected. So I'm not even bothered that it is not everybody, but I would love for it to get to a majority at some point in the future. So does your family have a family? Okay, everyone take a deep breath in. Deep breath out. for the next few minutes, we're going to take kind of a hard turn. And we're going to talk about some of the changes we are making as a church in the way that we do small groups. The reason why we're talking about this on a Sunday morning, first let me say, if you are new, I apologize in advance because you didn't know what we were doing before, and so you're just going to be like, I don't really care, just tell me what you're doing now. But I need to talk about what we were doing before and what we are doing to change it so people don't freak out. If you have been to church for 5 minutes, you know people get very stressed with any sort of change, and I'm the exact same way if I'm a part of something else. I'm not blaming you for that, but I want to say in advance that the changes we are making to small groups, everybody we've talked about it with behind the scene has been very excited and think this is going to be better for everybody. So take a moment, settle yourself. We're going to talk about some changes that we're making to small groups. And the reason why we are making these changes is because of everything I just preached. It's because of what we just said, that biological families and individuals need spiritual families. And we want to make it as easy as possible to get connected into a spiritual family. And we've realized over the last, really 6 months, we've been laser focused on trying to figure this out. But we've been looking at all the data from the last 4 years, and we discovered that I think there are some things we can be doing better to get more people connected into small groups. Here's some of that data for you. This is data from the last 4 years of the Bridge Church. If you're not a data person, just stay with me because we all got to just hear this reasoning together of why we're making the changes that we're making. Over the last 4 years, we looked at new people who started coming to the church, and we found that 77% of new people who join a life group and a team stick around. Now, it's not just about staying at the Bridge, but if you come for a year and then you quit church altogether, that's not good for someone's spiritual life. Again, that's not how you build a spiritual family. So if you know, grow, and go, that's what this means. You come to church, you join a life group, and you join a team, 77% of those people will stay connected to this church. Now, some of you are like, still 23% of them leave? Remember, this is over 4 years. 23% leaving over 4 years is actually very healthy because people, they move sometimes or God calls them to a different church. So if 77% of people who showed up in these doors stuck around over years, we'd be thousands and thousands of people. So this is a great indicator of what helps people get connected. If you factor out life group and just say, well, what about people over the last 4 years who joined a team? 69% of them, even if they only joined a team, stick around. So basically, if you join a life group or you join a team or both, you are in a good place. You're going to stay connected to the body. However, we've also been offering connect groups, and connect groups are short-term groups where you get together for 6 weeks, you study the Bible together, you build relationships, and then they end. And there has been, over the last 4 years, a ton of new people. I'm not talking about people who were here before 4 years ago. I'm saying new people who started coming to the church over the last 4 years and said, we really just want to do the connect group thing. We're going to join a connect group, then we'll join another connect group. We're not going to join a team. We're not going to join a life group. We'll just do connect groups. For a lot of people, they've seen connect groups as sort of their way to get connected. Of that group of people, by the way, that is a group of hundreds and hundreds of people. This makes me so sad to say, but hundreds and hundreds of people over the last 4 years said, we're just going to do connect groups. And of that group, only 5% of them stick around. 5% of people who only join a connect group or even multiple connect groups stick around over the 4 years. What that means is that connect groups have functioned more like disconnect groups than anything. And that's no one's fault, that's just reality. We think we've discovered why that is, and it's really two problems, and we're going to address these two problems. The changes we're making are to fix those two problems. The first problem is something that as a staff team we call something like the gap. Here's what I mean by this. Every year we have small group signups in January, in June, and in September, 3 times a year. And each time we launch small groups, let's say for January, we say, hey, we're launching connect groups and we're launching life groups. You can join either one. If you join that connect group, it'll run for 6 weeks. If you join the life group, it will last the entire year, and then you can re-up the next year if you want for that same life group or a different one. Then we would launch again in June. We would say, okay, connect groups launch in June and life groups launch in June. Same thing in September. Connect groups launch in September and life groups launch in September. You see this little arrow to show this life group starts in June, but it runs all the way back to the beginning, to the next June. What would happen is that people would join a connect group, it would go for 6 weeks, and then we'd say, okay, your next step is to join a life group. which happens all the way months later. You all see the problem? There was a massive gap between when a connect group would end and when people could join in for the next thing, which if you're a faithful, devoted, committed church attender who shows up on the Sunday with a snowstorm, you're like, well, no big deal. I'll join my connect group, and then I'll wait a few months and I'll join my life group, or I'll join another connect group. But for people who are brand new to church, that gap was just too big. In that gap between when they joined the connect group, met a few people, and then it just ends, and there's no immediate next step, that is where we would lose a ton of people. And again, we would not just lose them from being a participant in groups, but we'd lose them from the church altogether. So we are going to close that gap. Here's what I mean. Going forward, we're going to try this year. We may adjust. Obviously, we don't want to do things that don't work, so this is always an experiment. But what we're going to do is this. In January, we're going to launch connect groups only. They will run for 6 weeks, and at the very last couple weeks of connect groups, we will have life group signups and life groups launches. Do you all see the difference? Yes, we can give some claps for that. Makes total sense, right? So you join a connect group. That's why Meredith said next week is the Connect Fair. We're not having life group signups next week. So we're only having Connect group signups next week. Then towards the end, we will have life group signups, and there will be literally zero gap between when Connect groups end and life groups start. So for anyone who wants to continue on, they can continue on. We're not exactly sure what we're going to do for the summer. It will likely look similar. For the fall, it will look exactly the same. You join the Connect group, it runs for 6 weeks. If you're ready to take the next step, you go straight to the next step. If you don't do a Connect group and you just want to do a life group, that's fine. You can just sign up for life groups right here. I'll talk more about this in a minute, but if you want to do the 6-week Connect group and that's it, we're not going to force you to do the next step just because it happens right after. You can still just do the Connect group and try it out. If that makes sense, say I'm tracking. The second one is a little bit harder to explain, so please stay with me, and I promise I'll wrap this up as quickly as possible. The other problem we have found of why we would lose so many people when it came to connect groups specifically is that there were groups that are set up for failure. Here's what I mean by this. Here's the plan. People, connect groups, life groups. Every sign up, we'd have 100, this is 100 dots right here. You have 100 or 150 or sometimes even 200 people sign up for a group. We would give them 15 connect groups to choose from. Pick a connect group, pick whichever one you want, and then after the connect groups, at some point, before there was a big gap, months later, you would join a life group. And so people would do that. They would go from the just signing up, they would join all these different connect groups, and then they would join the life groups. How would that happen though? Essentially, we would just say, sign up for whatever group strikes your fancy. Sign up for whatever night. And there's all these different options, and people would tend to sort into those groups in essentially a random way. Yes, people are choosing, but they don't know who's going to be a part of that group. They don't know the leader. They don't know each other. They're just sort of randomly sorting themselves into these groups and then randomly sorting themselves into these groups. Now, you might say, what's the problem in that? Well, on paper, it doesn't seem to have any problems except for the fact that we actually zoom in the groups and say, well, who actually joined the group? And you know what you find? A lot of them are set up for failure, meaning people join that connect group or life group and everybody lives 45 minutes in different directions from each other. If they're supposed to be building relationships outside of the group, but everybody lives 45 minutes away because we're kind of a regional church, and everybody's coming from all these different places. If they all live 45 minutes away, guess what? No one's ever going to hang out outside of the group. You know what else would happen is that we would have, let's say, 8 married couples sign up for the group, the connect group or the life group, and 1 single person. And the single person's like, well, I'm obviously the odd one out, right? Which is potentially a negative experience for that single person. We would also have groups where they would all sign up, and again, because we're just allowing this to sort of happen randomly, we'd have 10 or 15 people sign up for a group, and they're all brand new Christians. Guess how the leader of that group is feeling? I'm in trouble. They're going, how am I supposed to disciple 10 or 15 brand new Christians? And wouldn't you know, 2 months later, everything falls apart because it's essentially the blind leading the blind. We also will have groups where 10 or 15 people sign up and they've all been Christians 30 years. And all the people in that group signed up for a group saying, hey, I'm excited to join a group so I can be that spiritual father to somebody, so I can mentor somebody. And they all sit down in the circle. They all realize everybody's been saved since right around when Jesus actually rose, right? they've all been saved forever, and so it doesn't actually work. That's what happens when essentially things get sorted randomly. Now, we're not going to be controlling and say you must do this group and not this one. We will still allow you to choose whatever group you want, but we want to make recommendations for groups that we think will work well together. Our youth pastor, Kevin, said when the students sign up for camp, he will agonize for weeks on how to do cabin assignments, because if you have the right students in the right cabin, things go really well. If you have the wrong students together in the same cabin, things can go very poorly. So we want to try to do that same sort of thing. Here's the way we're going to do it, and this is going to sound very crazy, but I believe it's going to be so much better for everybody. Rather than having 15 different Connect groups that people sign up for in the Connect group launch, we're going to have 4 and only 4. Now, some of you are thinking, okay, if we have 100 people or 150 or 200, how are they going to be in 4 Connect groups? Well, the way is they're going to be massive Connect groups. They're going to be in the auditorium or in the student center or in a large space. We're going to have one on Sunday, one on Monday, one on Wednesday, one on Thursday. And when people show up for that massive Connect group, we will put them into little circles at tables. How will this happen? How will this random signups, big groups get put into tables? With tender, loving care. So if you sign up for the Monday night Connect group, let's say again, if we have 150 people sign up just like normal, for just 4 now though, there's gonna be 30 or 40 or 50 in each group. That allows us as a staff to try to speed date people into our, not that you're actually going to speed date at the thing, that's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying we're going to try to sort people into tables that we believe will be good fits for each other for that Connect group season. And if they want to continue on and become a life group, it will be hopefully a natural transition. Each of the table leaders at the Connect group will be life group leaders who are there to help everybody connect during the Connect group, and then for whoever wants to, they don't have to, but they can continue on as a life group. I hope this makes sense. It's very different. It's a little bit weird, but we believe this is going to be way better for everybody. Let me say a couple things. Some of you are saying, okay, if there's only 4 Connect groups, what if there's not a great Connect group for me? There's only these big 4 Connect groups. What if there's one that is, there's none that I'm interested in? We hope that these 4 big Connect groups, there'll be something that's a fit for everybody on some level. They're broad and big. We're going to do finances, foundations, intro to Christianity, a marriage group, and a parenting group. Everybody should fit in somewhere. If you're like, my finances are amazing, I'm solid with Jesus, my marriage is great, or I'm single, and I'm done parenting, I don't have kids, here's what I would say. Just join one of them to connect. Join a Connect group to connect with other people. Maybe you can be the person who is setting an example for how to do your finances well. You can say, hey, not that you have to preach this, right? But you could be a positive influence for how to handle each of these things. Join the Connect group to connect with other people, less because it has to be the perfect fit topic. Second thing I would say is some of you might say, well, what if I want to do a Connect group but not a life group? That's fine. Just join one of the Connect groups. You don't have to take that next step of joining a life group. That is 100% fine. Just pick one of them, get to know some other people. The other cool part about this is because there'll be 40 or 50 people hopefully at each one, you'll have an opportunity to meet a few people besides just the 10 or 5 people you might have met if you signed up for one of those Connect groups that had, when we had tons and tons of them. I hope this makes sense. Please shoot me an email, shoot me a Facebook message. I would love to answer any questions I have, but we really believe this is going to be best for everybody. It's going to be best for the people that just want to do a Connect group because we'll get you at a table that's going to be a better fit to build some relationships, and it's also going to be a better fit for people who want to go from Connect group to life group because we can help sort people into groups that will be a good fit. That is all for me. Let me pray for us before the storm gets any worse. God, thank you so much for everybody here. I pray that this change would not cause too much distress and discomfort, that people would be open to trying new things for the sake of more people getting into spiritual families. God, I pray that there would be life change that would happen from this next round of people getting into small groups and building relationships and overcoming struggles together. In Jesus' name, everybody said, Amen. If you need prayer, the prayer team will be up here. Big or small prayer requests, they would love to pray for you. We'll see you all next week for Connect Group sign-ups. Love you all. See you soon.